Question for you guys, wherever you are today, anyone here have any guilty pleasures? Show of hands. Got any guilty pleasures? Y'all got some guilty pleasures? I see a few hands. Online at other campuses, you got some guilty pleasures. You know, they're the things that we secretly love, that we don't want anyone to know, that we secretly love. I think most of us got one or two, right? You raise your hand. You want to share yours?
Mine?
Yeah, no, you're good. You don't have to share it. It wouldn't really... Mine? No. It wouldn't really be a guilty pleasure if we offered it very willingly, right? That's not what they are, but we've all got them. I think a big one for some people is fast food, right? Research suggests that the American fast food industry is worth almost $400 billion. And globally, that number increases to well over $900 billion. It's nearly a $1 trillion industry around the world. And the CDC suggests, get this, that roughly 36.5% of Americans eat fast food every day, which means, I heard a lot of but hey, I'm not a mathematician, but that should mean that if you ask 3 of the people around you right now, if they hit up the drive-thru on the reg, if we're all being honest, one of them would say yes. I dare you to ask that question of 3 people around you, right? Because we're all saying no, aren't we? Don't deny it. Heard some chocolate. Me? Fast food? No, I would never do that. People are like, oh, fast food, it's so disgusting. I would never touch it. You know, I especially love when you're talking to somebody about fast food. Have you ever found yourself in this situation before? And they're like, no, I would never go there. Kind of like they're better than you a little bit. But meanwhile, they're holding like a double chocolate chip frat from Starbucks in their hand. You're like, yo, that's a milkshake, you know, right? But nobody likes talking about eating fast food regularly because we feel embarrassed by it, right? That we're gonna get judged for it. People are gonna look down on us for it. I mean, I personally feel like, this is my theory, that's why the drive-thru exists, right? They tell you it's for convenience, so you don't have to get out of your car. No, it's so you can hide, okay? It's for hiding. Because by using the drive-thru, you can avoid the awkward situation where you're inside the restaurant, standing at the counter with your 2-gallon vat of sweet tea, and somebody you know walks in and they're like, oh, hey, and you're like, oh no, you know? Look, you could probably guess by my incredible physique that I have partaken in the McDonald's fry occasionally, okay? Now, I don't go around broadcasting that information, but my aforementioned figure, it does a lot of the talking for me, I would say, which is oddly relevant for what I want to talk about today. Not my physique, but something else, so we'll talk about it. The truth is fast food can be a guilty pleasure for some, right? But we've all got guilty pleasures. It might not be fast food for you, but it's probably something else. It's the thing or the things we love that we don't want other people to know that we love because we're afraid of what might happen, what they might think. We might lose people's respect, right? We feel like we might be judged, looked at differently. I mean, at the very least, we feel like we'd be embarrassed by it, right? But depending on what the guilty pleasure is and how it could affect the people around us, we may fear losing even more, like status or position, maybe even some relationships. And the latter was true for the man we're gonna look at today. See, much like each of the other characters that have been a part of our Change series, his story, it comes and goes in the blink of an eye. And yet, the limited information we have about him can change us in ways that we might not expect if we allow it. So why don't we meet him together? Later, Joseph of Arimathea asked Pilate for the body of Jesus. Now, Joseph was a disciple of Jesus, but secretly, because he feared the Jewish leaders. Okay, a lot happens in this verse. A lot happens suddenly in there. Let me catch you up quick, especially if you don't know the Easter story. And if that's you, literally no judgment about that. So glad you're here. You're in the right place. But yes, spoiler alert, Jesus does die around Easter. Although if you were here a few weeks ago when Pastor Ellis dragged a cross down on the platform, you might already know that. But we did technically skip Jesus' actual death to get here to Joseph. Don't worry, we're gonna talk a little bit more about that today, but of course, next week we're gonna talk about it as we celebrate Jesus' resurrection on Easter Sunday. I hope that you'll come, I hope that you'll bring a friend. It's gonna be awesome. Anyway, here, Joseph asks for Jesus' body But then we're told, and this is the part we're going to focus on today, that Joseph was a secret disciple of Jesus's because he feared the Jewish leaders. So as it turns out, our boy Joe had a guilty pleasure of his own, yeah? I mean, I used it tongue in cheek there, right? Because I'm not talking about a Big Mac or reality TV. We're talking about Jesus Christ himself. And it begs an obvious question on the surface, right? Like, why would Joseph want to hide his admiration for Jesus? Wasn't Jesus, at the very least, a good guy who had miraculous powers to heal? Wasn't he a guy who tried to teach everyone to love one another? Wasn't he the man who taught about God and the things of God in a way people hadn't heard before? If you spell it out like that, why would anyone feel like they should hide their admiration, their respect, their love for a person like that? Well, we got to get a little more context about who exactly Joseph was from the other gospel writers to fully put it into picture. You see, all four of the gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they all mention Joseph of Arimathea by name and give us important details about him and his life. Like this: Joseph of Arimathea, a prominent member of the council who was himself waiting for the kingdom of God, just another way of saying he was a disciple, went boldly to Pilate and asked for Jesus' body. So Joseph is not just another guy, it turns out. He was a prominent member of the council. See, the council that is being mentioned here by Mark was also known as the Sanhedrin, and they were a group of religious leaders in Jesus' day who, in essence, created and amended and enforced Jewish law. They made the decisions, and sometimes with Roman backing, they enforced whatever laws they had kind of come up with, however they saw fit. In theory, the Sanhedrin was meant to discern God's will for God's people, the Jewish people, and shepherd them toward God's will. They were supposed to serve. And this naturally gave them a lot of power and influence in the Jewish community. But unfortunately, as it often does with the powerful, many of the Sanhedrin grew to love their status and their influence more than they did serving their people. So, when Jesus comes along and he threatens their power by serving people, they didn't like him very much, as you might imagine. He was inadvertently, or maybe purposefully, trying to take away some of that influence and power from them. And over the course of Jesus' ministry, the members of this council, by and large, began to resent him more and more until they had had enough. See, they were the ones who tried multiple times to get Jesus killed, and eventually they were successful. They were responsible for Jesus' death. So that's happening over here with the members of the council and Jesus. At the same time, though, Joseph, who is a member of the Sanhedrin, who is one of the religious leaders, he started to love Jesus more and more. And as time passed, Joseph saw and understood who Jesus was and what he was trying to do, and this changed him. See, unlike the rest of these people over here, he wasn't chasing his own importance, his own power, his own status. He was chasing after Christ, the claims of Jesus, and Jesus' way of living life. It became his way of living life. He became a disciple of Jesus. So you got these two things going on, right? This dichotomy forming between how Joseph feels about Christ and how the rest of the Sanhedrin feel about him, until they're like on opposite sides of the whole Jesus issue. And so when you frame it that way, you know a little bit of the backstory, it becomes easier to see why Joseph would be a secret disciple, right? Because almost everyone around him has the power, and proved it eventually, to get Jesus killed. And who's to say Joseph wouldn't be next, right? If it came out that he loved Jesus. If they knew, at the very least, at a minimum on day one, he would no doubt be kicked out of the Sanhedrin. He would be labeled a heretic, and he would lose any influence and status he had. That's just a few of the things that would happen right away. So he probably felt like he had to keep it a secret so as to not lose everything that he had. But that raises an important question, doesn't it? Namely, is it okay to be a secret disciple? I mean, didn't we just last week talk about coming out of the darkness into the light? Didn't we talk about setting our preferences and our patterns aside in order to take up our cross and follow Jesus? How can these two things coexist? And it's a great question, one that I think we could spend a lot of time talking about, and I frankly would love that. But I kind of want to show maybe how these things can coexist with a real life experience that I've had, and moreover, the current life experience of people that I know. So I went to China in 2008 over Christmas. We went there to work with an American missionary who was living there. But on the way, or before we went, we were given very strict rules as to how we could enter the country due to the government's rigorous oversight of the Christian church. And it's a bit of a complicated situation that they got going on over there, but essentially it's this: only government approved and run churches can openly operate in China. As you can imagine, most Christians there refuse that kind of oversight. And instead they worship in what they call underground churches, house churches, which of course is against the law, and it's punishable by arrest or even time spent in internment camps. So, needless to say, under no circumstances could we say we were Christian missionaries coming in. Instead, we told customs we were coming over to teach English as a second language, which, before any of you judge me, okay, we actually did do that, okay? We taught in their version of an elementary school over there during the day, and we led a few adult English classes at night, and, maybe also helped the American missionary in some of the house churches, but we didn't tell anyone about that part. There were a lot of other rules too, right? For example, we couldn't post a single thing online about what we were doing in China because they were for sure monitoring the internet way before it was cool. And to this day, I don't exactly know where I was in China either. All these years later, I don't know. They didn't tell us. We were, quote, 2 hours west of Hong Kong in a, quote, small city of 8 million people. But that's all I know. That's all I got. I got my theories, but I still don't know where we were. So in essence, we were secret disciples in China, right? And admittedly, it was a little scary at times. There was one time I distinctly remember we were on the way to a house church, walking there, and it felt like we were being followed. I mean, I'm sure it had little to do with the fact that, I'm super white and was a lot taller than most everybody there. But it also, it's not every day you see that in mainland China. But I don't know, it felt a little scary to me at the time. We thought maybe they were trying to figure out what was going on, and maybe they were. It could have been harmless. Anyway, I was young. So we had a couple interactions like that, but for the most part, it was kind of fun, honestly. Like for us, it felt a little bit like being secret agents, right? Like I could be 007, someone else with me could be Ethan Hunt, although I'm probably more of like the Austin Powers brand of secret agent, but anyway, it was more fun and less scary for us because, we knew it would end. Like we had all the assurances in the world that if something did actually go down and we got caught up in a sticky situation with authorities, we'd eventually be fine because of our American citizenship. The truth is though, our forced anonymity, it wasn't for us. It was for them. It was for their protection. Because we knew we had ours. But the Chinese people who live there, they didn't know that. So for 2.5 weeks, for their sake, we never openly talked about Jesus. But I got to come home and now I get to do this from a platform in a room being broadcast on the internet, however I want. Meanwhile, the people that we met there 15 years ago, they've never been able to openly talk about their faith in Christ for risk of harsh punishment, for imploding their family. And yet they worship. And yet they walk multiple times a week to house churches, eager and ready to praise. And yet they risk their jobs, their safety, their livelihood, and more than that, in order to take up their cross and follow Jesus. I remember distinctly one night we led an open air worship service, which had to be legal all over the place. But so many people came. 40 people were saved that night. I just played a guitar, so wasn't on me. Jesus did a miraculous thing. These people came out and they worshiped, risking life and limb to do this. And I have so much respect for them because of it. I never have looked at them with some sort of judgment for living out their faith in secret. Similarly, none of the gospel writers say anything negative about Joseph's secret discipleship either. In fact, they only praise him for the person they knew him to be. See, and Luke does this most clearly when he writes this. There was a man named Joseph, a member of the council, a good and upright man, who had not consented to their decision and action. This is just a reference to the killing of Jesus. He did not consent. He was a good and upright man. I'd be willing to bet there are a lot of folks here, wherever you are, who have made the decision to follow Jesus with their lives. You've come out of the darkness into the light with your devotion to Christ, but you also find yourself in a situation where talking about Jesus all the time might cause more harm than good. Maybe you work in an organization where talking about your faith openly is a fireable offense. I think of our school teachers here, government employees. Maybe you and your spouse don't agree about Jesus or faith. And while you don't hide the fact that you want to follow Jesus, you still come to church without him, bringing it up over and over and over again in your house. It feels like it's just driving a wedge between you, right? Maybe you have decided to live your life for Jesus, but the people you grew up with, your best friends who you've known since elementary school, maybe those people who you're still the closest to, they're not there yet, right? And constantly talking about Jesus, and you should do this, and you should do that, it feels like you might be pushing them away. See, in situations like these, it feels like we have little choice in the matter. And the more I've thought about this, the more I've come to understand that in some ways, it is okay to be a secret disciple like Joseph was. But there is a catch. Let's check this out again, right? Luke calls Joseph a good and upright man, which you can't know if you don't study the Bible a little bit, if you don't figure out who Luke was, if you don't dig into more about who Joseph was. What you can't know is that these guys would not have run in the same circles, right? We've established that people who love Jesus didn't typically get along with people, the religious leaders who kind of hated Jesus. They did not see eye to eye, to put it simply. However, Luke is really just the guy who's doing investigative work. That's what his book is, right? He's talked to a lot of people, gotten a lot of eyewitness testimonies about the life of Jesus, and somebody somewhere in his talking mentioned Joseph of Arimathea and called him a good and upright man. They didn't have to do that, but they did. Because guess what? It was obvious from the way Joseph lived his life that he was not consumed by power and status and greed like his contemporaries. Joseph lived his life the way Christ calls all of us to, with compassion and kindness and love and care, devotion to God and to others. And in so doing, people could just look at him and know that guy's a good guy. He's an upright guy. He lives his life in a different way. While all the other religious leaders were using that religion and faith to grow their own brand, Joseph was changed by the life and legacy of Jesus, and he lived his life to build Christ. And that's the catch. If you don't hear anything else today, this is the catch. Being a secret disciple, it's not the same thing as concealing your faith altogether. Because while we may not always be in situations where we can openly talk about it, we can always live it. We can always live it. No matter where you are, what company you work for, who you're with, how others around you feel about faith in Jesus, you and I can always forgive others the way Christ forgave us. You and I can always extend grace to people who, honestly, we feel like don't deserve grace. But guess what? That's me, and that's you. We can always be kind to people who haven't been kind to us, especially those people we feel like are never kind to us. We can always respect people who don't respect us, who might make fun of us for following Jesus, right? Who call what we believe, I don't know, ghost stories or fairy tales. Has anyone ever said that to you? All that crap's just mumbo jumbo. Bedtime stories to make you feel better about mortality in your life. I mean, you see that kind of thing online all the time. And it's one thing when it's like a troll on the internet, right? They can type whatever they want. They can say whatever they want. Who cares? I got no time for it. But when somebody says it directly to your face, it's really tough not to retaliate in some way. I've been in that exact interaction before. Somebody I barely know dunk in on the thing I've built my life on, right to me. And hey, respect for being able to tell me right to my face, all right? Because not a lot of people would do that. So shake your hand, cool. But I'm not an aggressive guy at all. But it takes a lot for me not to make some sort of snide comment or scathing reply right back to him. But loving that person instead of fighting fire with fire, that's what we're called to do. That's what Peter called us to do. Don't repay evil for evil. Don't retaliate with insults when people insult you. Instead, pay them back with a blessing. That is what God has called you to do, and he will grant you his blessing. This kind of thing is what every Christ follower must do. And it's something that can be done in any situation. You see, so much more often than not, the way we conduct ourselves, the way we live our lives, the influence we have with our actions, that's what draws people closer to God, not just the words themselves. I absolutely love how Pastor Angie said in the first week of this series. She said, God doesn't need me to come to his defense. He's God. He can handle that part all on his own. And right, we were just talking about anybody can say anything they want, right? Not just on the internet. They can say anything they want at any time. I mean, think about it, especially if you're new here today. Welcome, by the way. We love you. So glad that you're here. I mean, honestly, who's to say that I'm not just saying a bunch of things that I don't mean because it just sounds good in this situation? I mean, most people here today don't really know me, and I don't really know you, although I would love to. I would love to get to know you. But how can you be absolutely sure that the words I'm saying are really what I feel, just based on the words? I mean, you can't really, right? But I like to think that those of you who do know me understand that the way I live my life, my actions back up the things I believe, which is not to say that I'm perfect, because my list of things that I've gotten wrong is way longer than the things I've gotten right. But I do the best I can to live my life in obedience to what God has called me to do. I do make every effort I can to be a good and upright man like Joseph before me. Because guess what? I do in fact believe that Jesus is who he says he is. I do believe that Jesus has a purpose and a plan for every single person's life who's here today and who's not. I do believe that Jesus died on the cross and rose at Easter so that each of us could have direct and unhindered access to God. Something that we don't deserve, that I don't deserve. But God wanted so badly that Jesus gave his life so that we could have it. I believe all of that to my core. And by living my life in such a way that reflects the belief, I'm doing what Paul told us to do. You're doing what Paul told you to do when he said, live a life worthy of the calling you have received. Each of us has been called to obedience to Jesus by living our lives in a way that reflects the nature and character of God. That is the only thing Jesus asked us to do if we're going to take up our cross and follow him, as Pastor Alice talked about a few weeks ago. And please, don't mishear me. Don't get it twisted. I'm not saying we should never talk about God or be forthcoming with our faith. Not at all. I actually covered a lot of that subject based on Joseph's life in a conversation in the follow-up video I made for this topic. Please go check it out on our website. I think you'll enjoy it. All I'm trying to say right now is that living our lives in a way that Jesus commands us to, that does the talking for us. It's what shows the undeniable proof that you and I have been changed by Christ in an all-encompassing way. And in the end, this was Jesus' intent for us all along. I mean, seriously, if you go back and you read the full story of Jesus' life on earth, which is what the four Gospels are about that I mentioned earlier, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, If you read those books and you really pay attention to what Jesus tells us to do, tells his followers to do, almost all of it is practical and actionable and relational. It has very little to do with the saying of things and much more to do with the doing of things in pursuit of love and devotion to God, in love and devotion to other people. Jesus himself says it this way in one of his last moments with his disciples, a famous moment that maybe you've seen before. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. I'm sure that you've seen this verse hundreds of times. I know I have. But did you know that the way it's translated here doesn't quite capture the sentiment Jesus was trying to get across, at least in the original language? And that's not to say that there's anything wrong with this translation. It's perfectly good. It's great. But loads of biblical scholars believe that what Jesus was really trying to say was more like this. Therefore, in your going, make disciples of all nations, teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. You could also change this phrase to as you go. Either way, the sentiment changes when you read it this way, right? It no longer says, leave where you are, go somewhere else, and tell everyone there you meet about Jesus. Again, that is something Jesus would say, so I'm not knocking that. I've done a lot of that. God willing, I'm going to do more of it, and I plan to. But with this slight rephrasing, Jesus is really saying, wherever you find yourself, wherever I put you right now, live your life in a way that makes disciples. Or live into the change I've made in you so that I may change others through you. That's what Joseph of Arimathea did thousands of years ago after he was changed by Christ. His character, his actions, and his life, it was easy to see that he was living a life like Christ called him to. And he was living it in such a way and showing, being a reflection of Jesus in a way that his words were not able to. See, because even when surrounded by people who wanted nothing more than to get Jesus out of the picture so that they could grab all the power, it was obvious to those who met Joseph that, he wasn't like that. He had been changed by Christ. And he was a good and upright man. And it's because of the change that happened in him that although it's short, his story is forever etched in the Bible. As followers of Christ, we can and we must follow Joseph's example and be people who live lives worthy of the calling we've received. No one said it was going to be easy. Jesus used pretty tough language to describe it. Take up your cross and follow me. But our family and our friends, our communities, they're counting on us to let the change Jesus made in us be reflected outside of us. So love like Jesus loves. Serve like he served. And live your whole life as best you can like he did. Because if we'll do that, our whole world might just be changed too.
So much of our faith is about learning how to live our lives like Jesus lived his. To love like he loved, forgive like he forgave, and to simply be more like him. When we allow that change to happen in us, we will start to see it take place in the lives of others around us. So before we leave here today, we want to give you a song that you can use like a prayer, asking God to show you and shape you to be the person that he needs you to be. And it goes like this. Help me love like you, and help me to serve like you do. Show me how to live and show me how to give, and show me how to be like you. Won't you stand and sing it with us? Here we go. And help me to love like you, and help me to serve like you do, and show me how to live, and show me how to give, and show me how to be like you. Here we go. And help me to love like you, and help me to serve like you do. Show me how to live, and show me how to give, and show me how to be like you. 'Cause your holiness is making me holy. Your goodness makes me want to be so good. Your faithfulness is making me faithful as I seek to live like you would. As I seek to live like you would.
If you love like Jesus and serve like Jesus, then it will change us. People will see that we're changed, and they'll want that for themselves. The way that we live our lives matters. So let's live lives worthy of the calling and the teachings and the example of Jesus. And let's do like Jesus did and draw people to God. This week, you can live like Jesus by inviting someone to church for Easter. You can use the invite link in the chat that the host will put up, or you can simply email them a link to our website where they can learn more about our church and watch on Sunday morning. Remember, our times next week are a little different. It's going to be at 8 o'clock, 9:45, and 11:30 a.m. I'll see you then.